Okay, so that's how we break up something into its major components. And I skipped the name because it's going to be a little bit harder to do because I got about half the people with a middle name and half the people without a middle name. So this is going to require me to write a little bit more complex formula, but it's going to be the same idea. I'm going to look for a field separator and break this stuff up. Okay. So I just copied the names over to this first column here so I could just work off a fresh sheet. Looking through that, what's the field separator? Do I need to put one in there? How do I know where a first name stops and the next one and the last name starts? What's separating the first name from the last name there? The space, right? Okay. So I already have my field separator here. So in this case, I'll just use that as my, just like I used the add symbol last time, I can use the space here. Okay. So looking through this, and I bless my lucky stars or whatever, because I don't have, everybody has just one first name. So I don't have, people with 2 or 3 first names or whatever. So that's great. It makes my job easier here. So all I have to do is find that first space, and everything to the left of that first space is their first name. So this is just exactly the same thing we did last time. I told it to look for a space. Double quote, space, double quote. So find a space in A3, and it returns that number, and then I just grab that number, one less than that, characters from the left-hand side. There's their name. Okay. And then I'm following the basic strategy I used last time. I'm going to look for the next field separator. So again, here I just used the same find that I used last time. And it said starting in one position past the first space, look for the second space. And the first 3, it returned an error message because there is no second space. And then for Henry Fountain Ashurst, it did, and so on and so forth. All right. So the ones where there's an error message simply says they don't have a middle name, and the ones where we get a number, they do have a middle name. Okay. So all this leads me to say, I'm going to need an if statement here. If there's a number there, I want to grab something out of the middle. If there's not, I'll just leave that blank because we don't know what their middle name is. It's not in this list of information that was given to us. Okay. So to make my if statement a little bit easier to do, I'm going to first worry about setting up the Boolean expression, and then I can go through and do this stuff. So in this next column over, ISERR is error. Simply says look at a cell, and if it finds an error message in that cell, return true, otherwise return false. That's all that does. And then I take not, which makes it flips it to the other way around. So when I'm done here, if this is false, so what I'm saying here in column E, do they have a middle name? Do we know what their middle name is? If it's false, no, we don't know. If it's true, yes, we do know. Does that make sense? So again, I broke this up into the smaller steps because it's easier for me to think about. All I have to do here is worry about do they have a middle name or not. Just test for that. And now I said, okay, if they have a middle name, I've got to do one thing. If they don't have a middle name, I've got to do something else. So I can go ahead and start thinking about my if statement. Right here. If E3 is false, E3 is the proposition they have a middle name. So if that's false, they don't have a middle name. So all we need to put in that cell is a blank. Double quote, nothing in between them. Just 2 keystrokes, right? One double quote, then another double quote. So that takes us through this first part here. If this is true, then they do have a middle part to their name, and so we need to take something out of the middle. And so we just use the mid function here, and we say it's going to be between these two numbers here, and we just do the same thing we did last time. So it's the same kind of mid function you used last time to pull out the career. It's just wrapped inside of, or there's an if statement around it. Okay. And so then we can just copy that formula down, and it works just like we want it to. This guy doesn't, no name, no middle name, no middle name, okay, and so on and so forth. All right? So we can do that. And then I want to pull out their last name, and I know that's from the right-hand side, and so to do the right-hand side stuff, I need the length of the string. So just like last time, we find the length of the string, and now we can set up the last part of this. First person there has no middle name, so we know that her last name is between these two numbers, right? And so on and so forth. When we get down here to this guy, Henry, Henry has a middle name, so we know that his last name lies between this number and that number, right? So then we can deal with that, and so on and so forth. So over here, we just have an if statement. If E3 is false, they don't have a middle name, then we want to grab some stuff from the right just like we did before, and we want to use the number that's in G3 minus B3. If it's true they have a middle name, we'll skip this first right function and go right to the second one. And we basically say from this one, just take it from, between this number and this number and grab it. So we're just saying, well, if it's this way, use this right function. If it's not, use that right function. And I copy that down. And I've got their last name off by itself. All right? So any questions about what I did there? The only difference here is we had to use an if statement because it was about 50-50. About half the people had a middle name, the other half didn't. If only a few had a middle name, then I would just bite the bullet and go back and fix it by hand. Okay. But in this case, I can one formula here will cover everything, and I'm done. All right. Now, once we have these in columns, like they're in separate little fields like this, or these own little columns like that, we can do some interesting things with them. We can put them back together. It's easy to put things back together. Concatenate is a fancy word to say take these little strings and make one big string out of them. So what I want to do over here, now that I have this broken up, is I want to put it in last name, comma, space, first name. Just because, right? So here is my concatenate, and you can have as many of these arguments as you want. It just says take the text that's in A3, add to that. I've got their double quote, comma, space, double quote. So add to that a comma, space. So take their last name and add to that a comma, space, and then add to that their first name. So it's going to put all those three strings together and put the thing out like I want it to do. That's all concatenate does. Okay. So if you're ever in a position where you're collecting data like this, it's always easier to put it in separate columns like this, because often you're going to want to recombine it in different ways. So it's a good idea to put it in separate columns, and then you can, as you can see, it's a trivial matter to put the stuff back together however you want. It would take you a fair amount of time to break that up into columns. So save yourself some time by just putting it into columns to start with. All right. And then, obviously, when you want to use this someplace else, you're just going to copy, paste values, and you can do that sort of stuff. All right? Just a couple of other functions here you should know about. There's one called upper. And all that does is changes all the characters in the string to uppercase. Okay. You might need that. There's another one, lower, that does what you think it does. It changes everything to lowercase. And the one that you'd probably use from time to time, because often you'll get data from a data warehouse and it'll all be in all caps or all lowercase, one called proper. And it simply capitalizes the first letter of each word in the string. So you can use that to do stuff with it. All right? So any questions about this? Okay. So take your column of names from people in Nebraska, copy them over to P3, paste values, and go ahead and try to break it up into 3 columns: first name, middle name, last name.